When I found that letter tucked beneath her pillow, I felt my mother's voice rise from the grave. It had been 5 years since Mama passed. But that evening, standing in the guest room with the curtains half drawn, I could almost hear her whispering again, calm, careful, and certain. "Linda, baby, trust your eyes more than your heart." I used to think she meant men. But that night, staring at that faded blue envelope in my sister-in-law's handwriting, I realized she'd meant family too. Before all that, before the whispers and the fights and the note, things were simpler. Our home sat on a quiet corner in Cedarbrook, one of those small suburban towns where every lawn was trimmed, every dog knew its route, and every neighbor waved out of habit. My husband, Richard, worked at the auto repair shop down by the highway, and I taught piano lessons from our living room. Life wasn't grand, but it was ours, slow, honest, predictable. I liked my routines. Morning coffee at 6:30, Richard's boots by the door at 6:45, the smell of toast burning because he always forgot to lower the setting. We'd been married 22 years, long enough to stop expecting surprises. But when Richard's younger sister, Evelyn, called one spring evening, something in his voice changed. She'd gone through a bad divorce, her second one actually, and said she needed a place to get back on her feet. Richard looked at me across the dinner table that night, hopeful and uneasy. "Just for a little while," he said, stirring his stew. "She's family, Lynn. You know how Ev is proud but broken. She just needs time." I sighed, half reluctant, half guilty. Evelyn and I had never been close. She was sharp-tongued, always dressed too fancy for family dinners, and had a way of making small things sound like moral failures. But she was Richard's only sibling, and my mother always taught me, you don't shut your door on family even when they bring the storm inside. So I said yes. She arrived the next weekend, rolling up in her silver sedan with boxes labeled kitchen, closet, and memories. I remember thinking, that's a lot of memories for a short stay. Evelyn swept into our home like a gust of perfume and tension floral, expensive and impossible to ignore. Her hair was perfectly curled, her nails manicured, her voice smooth as cream. "Linda, you look lovely," she said, kissing my cheek without really touching me. The house hasn't changed a bit. Still, cozy. Cozy. That word always meant small when Evelyn said it. I helped her carry her boxes upstairs into the guest room, the one that used to be Mama's when she stayed with us during her last months. It still smelled faintly of lavender and cedar wood. I hadn't changed the curtain since. "You sure you don't mind?" Evelyn asked, glancing around. "I don't want to intrude," I smiled. "You're family, Ev. You can't intrude on family." She gave a polite laugh. But her eyes scanned the room like she was cataloging it, every picture frame, every piece of furniture, every ghost. The first few weeks went fine. She helped with dishes, took evening walks with Richard, and brought flowers for the kitchen table every Friday. I told myself she was trying, that maybe time would soften her edges and my own bitterness too. But little things started to change. She began rearranging the cabinets, saying things like, "Oh, I just thought this would make more sense here." She'd correct me gently when I spoke, "You mean who instead of that?" Dear. She even offered to freshen up my piano lesson schedule, calling parents to help manage the flow. It was like she'd slipped into the cracks of my life, quietly pushing me to the edge of my own home. One evening, I overheard her in the kitchen while I was upstairs folding laundry. Her voice was low, honeyed, careful. "Yes, I'm still here," she said into the phone. No, she hasn't noticed. Not yet. The way she said she, it burned through me. I told myself it was probably about her ex-husband, or maybe a friend, but the sound lingered. Later that night, when I came down for tea, she was sitting with Richard at the table, laughing softly about old times. They looked comfortable. Too comfortable. Richard looked up at me with that boyish grin I used to love, but in that moment it felt distant, like I was the guest now. "Hey, Lynn," he said. "Ev was just reminding me about that summer at the lake. You remember? When I broke my arm?" I nodded faintly. I wasn't at that lake trip. I'd only heard the stories. Evelyn looked at me with a small smile, sipping her wine. "He was such a reckless boy," she said. "Always thought he could fix the world with a hammer and a prayer." Her words were soft, but her eyes were sharp, watching me for a reaction. It was subtle at first, the way she positioned herself between us. If Richard called from work, she'd answer and say, "Oh, he's fine. Just busy, dear." If we planned dinner, she'd suggest recipes before I could. If I spoke, she'd listen with that polite, distracted smile that said she'd already decided what I meant. But I stayed quiet. Because sometimes silence keeps peace better than words, until the night I walked into her room. It was late past 11. I'd come upstairs to grab extra sheets from the linen closet and noticed her door half open. The lamp was on, the bed perfectly made, but she wasn't there. I was about to leave when I saw a small corner of paper peeking from beneath her pillow. Something in me froze. I shouldn't have looked. I knew it, but curiosity? That old, dangerous friend took over. I lifted the pillow slowly, and there it was, an old envelope, faded at the edges, sealed but worn. On the front, in my mother's handwriting, it read, "For Linda, when trust becomes a burden." My heart dropped. That was Mama's stationery. I'd recognize it anywhere, but why was it here in Evelyn's room? I held it like it might burn through my fingers. The edges were soft from touch someone had handled it often. My pulse hammered in my ears as I whispered to myself, why would she have this? Footsteps creaked in the hallway. I turned, and there she was, Evelyn standing in the doorway, robe tied neatly, face calm but eyes sharp as glass. "Looking for something?" she asked softly. The first week was polite. That's the word I'd use. Polite, like we were two women circling each other, pretending everything was fine while keeping our real thoughts tucked behind forced smiles. Laura helped around the house, at least in the beginning. She'd fold the laundry, tidy up the kitchen, even make breakfast sometimes. And when she did, I'd find my mother's old porcelain plates sitting out on the counter, the ones I'd packed away in the basement after Mom passed. I remember one morning I came down to find Laura plating pancakes on those very dishes. "Thought I'd make things feel homier," she said, that sweet, practiced smile never faltering. But my chest tightened. "Those were my mom's," I replied quietly, trying not to sound too sharp. "I keep them stored for a reason." Laura blinked just once and then laughed softly. "Oh, I didn't know. I'll put them back right after breakfast." She didn't. A small thing, right? But grief has a way of attaching itself to objects. To me, those plates weren't just dishes. They were the last pieces of my mother's warmth. And seeing them handled so casually by someone who never knew her unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. A few nights later, I caught Laura in the hallway just outside the guest room. She had her phone flashlight on, pointed toward one of the moving boxes I hadn't unpacked yet, the ones that held Mom's belongings. "Laura?" I called out. She froze, then turned around with that same easy smile. "Oh, hi, Mary. I couldn't sleep. I thought I heard something in here. Mice, maybe?" I stepped closer, eyeing the half-open box. "This is the storage box. You don't need to worry about it." Her tone stayed light. "Just making sure everything's all right. You know me, can't stand clutter." She walked off before I could say anything else. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I told myself I was overreacting, that grief makes us sensitive. But a part of me, small and trembling, whispered that something wasn't right. Over the next few days, strange little things began happening. My mother's framed photo, the one I kept on the mantel, was turned face down one afternoon. No one admitted to doing it. A small note I had tucked in my jewelry box, my mother's last written words to me, was missing. It wasn't long, just a folded scrap that said, "Mary, don't let kindness blind you to what's hidden." I searched the entire bedroom for it. Every drawer, every pocket, even the laundry basket. Nothing. When I asked Laura if she'd seen a small folded note, she smiled. That same polite, honey-coated smile. "A note? No, can't say I have. Maybe you misplaced it, dear." Dear. That word felt like vinegar. One afternoon, when Tom was out running errands, I went to dust the hallway cabinet where Mom's keepsakes were stored. The drawer, usually stiff from age, slid open too easily. Inside, things were rearranged. The rosary wasn't where I'd left it. The photo album had been flipped. And there, just barely tucked under a lace cloth, I saw the corner of that missing note. It was half hidden, as if someone had tried to put it back but didn't want me to notice. My heart started pounding. I picked it up, the familiar handwriting unmistakable, and unfolded it slowly. But before I could even read it again, I heard footsteps behind me. "Looking for something?" Laura's voice, calm, even. But there was something in her tone, a low, deliberate curiosity that made the back of my neck prickle. I turned around, clutching the note. This was missing. She tilted her head, eyes landing on the paper. "Oh, that old thing? I found it under the cabinet last week. Didn't realize it was important." My throat tightened. "It's my mother's." "Of course," she said softly, stepping closer. You know, Mary, I've been thinking about her a lot lately. How strange it must have been for her. Knowing how much you kept hidden, I froze. What are you talking about? Laura smiled faintly. Nothing really, just people always leave behind more than we think, don't they? She brushed past me and left the room. For a long moment, I stood there, holding the note, feeling as though my mother's voice had been touched, violated, by someone who didn't deserve to even speak her name. That night, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. My thoughts ran in circles. What did Laura mean by that? What I kept hidden? I tried asking Tom the next morning if his sister had said anything strange lately. He laughed it off. Mary, she's harmless. You're reading too much into things. Laura's just trying to help. But I knew. There was something behind that help. Something quietly watching me, studying me. And the worst part? I was starting to wonder if Laura knew more about my mother's final days than I did. The day everything changed started like any other. A cool Saturday morning. Sunlight dripping through the kitchen blinds. The smell of brewed coffee filling the air. I was wiping the counter when I heard the faint sound of a drawer closing from the guest room. I walked down the hall quietly. The door was cracked open just enough to see Laura sitting on the edge of her bed, holding something in her hands. It was a letter. My mother's stationery. And she wasn't reading it, she was copying it. I stepped inside before I even realized it. What are you doing? Laura startled, the pen dropping from her hand. Mary, you scared me! What are you doing with my mother's letter? Her expression faltered for the first time. I was just... It looked so beautiful, I wanted to write it down. The words, I snatched it from her hand. You went through her things? She stood, eyes sharp now. You shouldn't have kept it from Tom. He deserved to know what your mother wrote about him. What? I whispered. She left a note, Mary, and I saw what she said. Maybe you thought you could hide it forever, but secrets like that, they always find their way back. The room fell silent except for the sound of my heartbeat. I didn't know what she meant, not yet, but I knew this wasn't just about curiosity. Laura hadn't come to help. She'd come to find something. For a long time, I couldn't speak. The letter in my hand trembled like a living thing, as if my mother herself were there, shaking in warning. What are you talking about, Laura? I finally managed. What note? Her lips curved, not quite a smile, not quite a sneer, something in between. Oh, Mary, she said softly, you've been holding on to this house, this image, like a shrine. You act like everything's perfect, but your mother knew better, didn't she? I felt the air in the room tighten, heavier than before. You're out of line. Am I? She asked, stepping closer. Because I found something else in her old writing box. Something you probably hoped no one would ever see. I clenched my fists. What did you take? Laura didn't answer right away. She walked to the dresser, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a small folded paper. My stomach turned. I recognized the floral stationery immediately. My mother's. I reached for it, but Laura stepped back. I just want to understand, she said, her voice soft but deliberate. Why would your mother write a letter to Tom, not to you, warning him about you? My throat went dry. That's not possible. She unfolded the letter, her eyes glinting like she was savoring the moment. It says, she began, Tom, my daughter means well, but sometimes her need to control can destroy what she loves most. She stopped, then looked at me. Now, I don't know what that means, but it explains a lot about why you don't trust people, doesn't it? My heart was pounding. That couldn't be real. My mother had never written to Tom, not once. She barely tolerated him in the beginning. You forged that, I said, my voice shaking. You're lying. Laura's gaze softened, almost pitying. Am I? You think I'd waste my time forging a letter from a dead woman? I snatched the page from her hand, my eyes scanning the handwriting. For a moment, I almost faltered. It looked like Mom's cursive, the soft slant of her L's, the looping T's. But something about it was wrong. Too neat, too careful. My mother's hands had trembled toward the end. Her letters had wavered. This didn't. I folded it and looked at Laura square in the face. You don't know what you're doing. You're twisting something sacred. She tilted her head. Or maybe your mother wanted to be heard. Maybe she didn't trust you with her truth. That night, I sat alone at the dining table with both letters, the real one and the one Laura had shown me. I placed them side by side under the soft yellow glow of the lamp. The real one, the one I'd found half hidden in the cabinet, was short, direct, loving in its own way. Mary, Don't let kindness blind you to what's hidden. The forged one was longer. Dramatic, a careful imitation, too polished to be real. But as I stared at them, something else began to gnaw at me. How had she known where to look? My mother's writing box wasn't labeled. It had been buried under linens and old recipe cards, things only I would know held meaning. Unless someone told her. Unless Tom said something. I didn't want to believe it, but the thought festered all night. The next morning, I found Tom and Laura sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee like nothing was wrong. They both turned when I entered. "Good morning," Tom said cheerfully, completely unaware of the storm in my chest. Laura smiled faintly, stirring her coffee. "We were just talking about Mom. I was telling Tom how much she reminds me of ours, strong-willed, sharp." Tom chuckled. "Yeah, Mom was one of a kind." The way Laura said ours made my stomach twist. She had inserted herself into everything, our space, our meals, our memories. I took a seat. "Tom, can I talk to you alone?" Laura stood, gathering her cup. "No secrets now. That's how families fall apart." Her tone was light, but there was an edge under it. She left the room slowly, deliberately. I turned to Tom the moment the door shut. "She's been going through my mother's things. She even showed me a letter, one that wasn't real." Tom frowned. "A letter?" "Yes, she's copying Mom's handwriting. She said Mom wrote something to you, warning you about me. It's not true." He leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Mary, listen. Laura's a little odd sometimes, but she wouldn't fake a letter. Maybe your mom did write something like that, and you just didn't know." I stared at him in disbelief. "You think I wouldn't know my own mother's handwriting?" He sighed. "I think you're tired. You've been grieving, and maybe this obsession with the note, it's making you see things that aren't there." The sound that came out of me was half laugh, half gasp. "You think this is grief?" "Tom, she's trying to turn you against me." He stood abruptly. "You're making a big deal out of nothing." That was the moment I realized I was alone in this. The following days were unbearable. Laura acted like nothing had happened, humming while she cooked, chatting with Tom, smiling politely whenever our eyes met. But at night, I'd hear drawers open, steps on the creaky floor, a whisper of paper. I started locking the bedroom door. Then one morning, I found the family photo on the hallway wall, the one from last Christmas, with a tiny tear across my mother's face. That was when I stopped pretending. Laura wasn't just stirring trouble. She was trying to erase my mother from this house piece by piece. And I had no choice but to find out why. The next weekend, when Tom left to visit his friend's workshop, I decided to search Laura's room. I knew it was wrong, but so was what she'd been doing. I waited until I heard her car leave the driveway, then quietly opened her door. Her suitcase was half unzipped near the bed. Inside, folded neatly between sweaters, were several of my mother's old letters and one photo. A photo of my mother and a younger man, Tom's father. They were standing together in front of the old garden gate, smiling. But Mom's expression was different, almost nervous. I froze. My mother and Tom's father? No, it couldn't be. But then, tucked behind the photo, was another note, one I hadn't seen before. It was shorter than the rest. "I made mistakes I can't undo. Please forgive me before they find out." The handwriting was hers. I knew it immediately. I sat on the edge of the bed, the air heavy, the floor creaking beneath my weight. And for the first time since Laura had arrived, I realized she wasn't here for me. She was here because she'd found out something about our parents. I sat there for what felt like hours, the letter trembling between my fingers. The room was quiet, too quiet. Even the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen seemed distant. My mind replayed every conversation my mother had ever had about Tom's family. Every time she had hesitated to talk about his father. Every quiet look that seemed to say, "There's more I'm not telling you." I thought back to the first time I brought Tom home to meet her. She'd been polite, but not warm. When he left that night, she'd said only one thing. "He looks like someone I used to know." At the time, I thought she meant it kindly. Now I wasn't so sure. I placed the letter down carefully on the bed and stared at the photo again. My mother standing close to Tom's father, their shoulders nearly touching. Her smile didn't look romantic. It looked worried. Could Laura have known this? Was this why she came? I tucked the photo back where I found it, folded the note, and slipped both into my sweater pocket. My hands were cold, trembling. When Laura came home later that afternoon, I was waiting in the kitchen. She froze in the doorway when she saw me sitting there, her purse still hanging from her shoulder. Mary, she said carefully, you startled me. Where did you get that photo? I asked, my voice calm but shaking underneath. Her expression flickered just for a second before settling back into her usual smooth composure. What photo? The one of my mother and your father. Silence. Then she dropped her keys onto the counter with a sigh. So you've been through my things. I had to, I said, standing up. You've been digging through mine since the day you got here. Laura crossed her arms. And now you understand why. My heart pounded. Understand what exactly? She took a slow breath. Your mother and my father had an affair. Years ago, before either of us knew each other. I shook my head instantly. That's not true. It is, she said quietly. I found letters, not just the ones you've seen. My father kept them in a box. When he died, I found them. I recognized your mother's name. I felt dizzy. That's impossible. My mother would never... She did, Mary. Laura's voice softened. She ended it when she got pregnant. But she was already married to your father by then. The world spun around me. You're lying, I whispered. She stepped closer. No, I came here because I needed to know if you knew. If you understood that we might share more than just a last name through marriage. Her words echoed in my chest. We might share more. My knees went weak. I reached for the edge of the counter to steady myself. You're saying... Yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You and I might be... sisters. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt as if every sound in the world had been sucked away. No ticking clock, no creak of the floor, no hum of the house. Just me and her, standing in the kitchen with a truth too heavy to hold. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her she was wrong, that my mother wasn't capable of such deceit. But deep down, something hurt, something that recognized the possibility. The way my mother always avoided questions about Tom's family. The way she cried once when she thought I was asleep after Tom and I got engaged. Could it be guilt? I forced myself to speak. Why didn't you just tell me when you arrived? Laura's eyes softened. Because I didn't know how. I didn't want to hurt you. I just wanted to understand the truth before saying it out loud. I swallowed hard. And what about that fake letter? The one you showed me, the one you said was from my mother to Tom? A shadow crossed her face. I wanted to see how far you'd go to protect her. I wanted to see if you already knew. I closed my eyes. You manipulated me, she nodded slightly. Maybe I did. But only because I needed you to be honest, even if it hurt. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind chasing itself in endless circles. If what Laura said was true, then everything about my life, my marriage, my family, my identity, was tangled in lies none of us chose. But one thing didn't make sense. If Laura and I shared the same father, then Tom, her brother, and my husband, wasn't her brother by blood. The realization made my stomach churn. Could my mother have known? Could Tom's father? I turned on the bedside lamp and took out the old note again, my mother's handwriting staring back at me. Don't let kindness blind you to what's hidden. For the first time, I understood what she meant. She wasn't warning me about Laura. She was warning me about the truth. The next morning, I went to visit my mother's grave. The small white stone sat under a maple tree, leaves scattered like gold across the grass. I knelt down, my voice trembling. Mom, what did you do? The wind picked up, cold and sharp, carrying the faint smell of rain. I closed my eyes. I need to know, I whispered. Did you love him? Did you keep this from me to protect me? Or to protect yourself? Tears burned my eyes, but I didn't wipe them away. I just sat there until the rain began to fall. When I finally drove home, I found Laura waiting on the porch, a small box in her lap. She stood when she saw me, her eyes red from crying. I found this, she said softly, holding it out. It's from my father's things. It might answer what we can't. Inside the box were old letters, real ones this time, all signed by my mother. Each letter told the same story. Regret, confusion, guilt, and love that had no place to exist. But one letter, the last one, broke me completely. If they ever find out, they'll never forgive us. Especially Mary. But tell her one day, please, she deserves the truth. My mother had known this would surface eventually. And she was right. I looked up at Laura, who stood there silently, her eyes reflecting the same pain I felt. I didn't come to destroy you, she said. I came to finish what they couldn't. For the first time since she'd arrived, I believed her. But that didn't make the truth any easier to live with. I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes before walking into the house. My hands were still shaking, my thoughts tangled in a web of disbelief and fear. Tom was sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone. When he looked up, his face softened with relief. "Hey, where have you been?" I was worried. His voice, so warm, so familiar, almost broke me. "I went to the cemetery," I said quietly, hanging my coat. He nodded slowly, his brow creasing. "Your mom?" I didn't answer. I just sat down across from him, clutching the small box Laura had given me. "Tom," I began, "I found something. Something about our families." He frowned, setting his phone aside. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath. "It's about your father and my mother." He blinked, confusion flickering across his face. "What about them?" My voice trembled. "They had a relationship. Before we met. Before we were even born." Tom stared at me for a long moment, his expression blank, as if trying to process words that didn't fit together. "What?" he finally whispered. "They were involved," I said softly. "It might mean that Laura and I—" He stood up suddenly, pacing. No, that's not possible." "Tom, my dad loved my mom," he said sharply. "He would never—" "Please," I interrupted gently. I didn't believe it either. "But there are letters. From my mother. To him." He stopped pacing and looked at me, really looked. His jaw tightened, his eyes dark. "Where did you get them?" "Laura found them after her father passed. She came here to find out if it was true." Tom shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "So that's why she's been acting so strange." "Yes," I whispered. "She knew. Or at least suspected." He turned away, his back to me. "You're telling me you and my sister might be—" "Half-sisters," I finished, my voice barely audible. Tom sank onto the armchair, his hands over his face. "This is insane," he muttered. "You're saying my father cheated on my mother with yours?" I nodded slowly. "Yes." Silence filled the room. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Then Tom laughed. Not a real laugh, but the kind that comes when the truth is too absurd to believe. "God, this family just keeps on giving, doesn't it?" That night, Tom didn't speak much. He poured himself a drink, then another, and sat in the dim light of the living room while I pretended to read. Laura stayed in her room. The whole house felt like it was holding its breath. Around midnight, I heard Tom's voice, low, tired, from the hallway. "Mary," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I need to know, does this change how you feel about me?" I looked up. "What do you mean?" He gestured helplessly. "If what you're saying is true, if your mom and my dad had something, then what does that make us? What does that make our marriage?" I walked over and took his hand. "It makes us victims of their choices. Not guilty of them." He looked at me, eyes red. "You really believe that?" "I have to," I whispered. "Because if I don't, I'll lose everything I love." The next morning, Laura came downstairs, pale but composed. "Tom," she said, her voice steady, "we need to talk." He hesitated, then nodded. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where so many of our family dinners had once been filled with laughter. Laura placed the letters on the table between them. "These are the ones I didn't show Mary. You should see them." Tom glanced at me before opening the top letter. As he read, his shoulders tensed. I could see the pain building in him with every line. When he finally set the letter down, he didn't speak for a long time. Then softly he said, "So it's true." Laura nodded. "I'm sorry." He exhaled slowly, his voice breaking. "He made us live a lie." Laura reached for his hand, but he pulled it away. "You knew and you still came here?" "I came to tell the truth," she said. "Not to hurt you." Tom stood, turning toward the window. "Well, you did both." The days that followed were quiet, heavy. Laura packed her bags a week later. When she came to say goodbye, she stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at me. "I didn't mean for it to end this way," she said softly. "I know," I replied. "But sometimes the truth doesn't set you free, it just shows you what freedom costs." She nodded slowly, tears glinting in her eyes. "Do you think we'll ever see each other again?" "Maybe," I said. "When it stops hurting." We hugged, awkwardly, hesitantly, like two people who shared both too much and not enough. Then she was gone. Months passed. The house felt emptier without her, though I never expected it would. Tom and I went to therapy. We talked about trust, about legacy, about the weight of family secrets. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the trees, Tom reached for my hand. "I've been thinking," he said quietly. "Maybe this is a chance to start over. To build something honest, finally." I smiled faintly. "No more secrets?" He squeezed my hand. "No more secrets." That night, I took the old letters from the box one last time. I read them all, then folded them carefully and placed them in the fireplace. As the flames curled around the paper, I whispered, "It's over, Mom." The letters turned to ash, light, silent, weightless. For the first time in a long while, I felt the same way. When the last ember faded, I stood in the quiet glow of the firelight and thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd found. The truth had broken us, yes, but it also made us real. Families aren't built on perfection. They're built on what we choose to carry and what we choose to let burn.